Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first event of Friends of Europe's Africa-Europe Days, a series of activities running from the 2nd to the 9th of December, which focuses on accelerating the impact and energizing the Africa-Europe partnership across key areas, including energy, agriculture, digital health, and transport. I'm Amanda Rohde. I'm Senior Program Manager here at Friends of Europe, and I'm here to guide you through today's first discussion. First, a quick reminder to everyone of the rules of the game. To those of you joining via Zoom, a quick reminder to make sure your cameras are on and to keep your microphones muted until we come to you in the conversation. If you would like to ask a question at any point, make a comment or provide your feedback, I encourage you to raise your virtual hand by selecting the button on the Zoom screen. We also encourage that you make use of the comment section on the Zoom platform to further exchange information and reflections. And to those of you joining via the live stream, welcome as well. You can also take part in the conversation by tweeting. We encourage you to tweet. Tweet hashtag #FOEdebate and hashtag Africa Europe Foundation. Today we're talking about accelerating sustainable energy for all, Africa-Europe relations post-COVID and in the face of the climate emergency. Creating, leveraging, and increasing access to sustainable energy is a key priority for both Africa and Europe. Though we're now in the final decade of action to achieve the SDGs, the number of people without access to energy or to electricity across Africa is in fact set to increase due to COVID-19. That said, and looking ahead to the African Union-European Union Summit, there's a call for governments, institutions, and the private sector to reinforce their work to develop integrated, sustainable, and vibrant energy markets. So this is what we're diving into today, and we've got an excellent cast of experts in the field who we're going to introduce shortly. But we're going to start off with a scene setter from Maximilian Jarrett, who is the International Energy Agency's Africa Program Manager. Max, thank you for being here with us this morning. We're going to start off with you. So given the importance of the African Union Commission and the International Energy Agency's Ministerial Forum that you organized last week, what can you tell us about the ongoing energy situation in Africa?
Thank you. Good morning. I'm very pleased to participate in the discussion this morning. It's really timely because it's just a week since the second AUC-IEA Ministerial Forum, which this year focused on the theme, Securing Africa's Energy Future in the Wake of COVID-19. Now, this forum was one of the biggest ones, was the biggest one convened by IEA with African energy leaders. It saw the participation of senior energy leaders and ministers from a group of African countries that make up, listen to this, 70% of Africa's total primary energy supply, nearly 70% of Africa's GDP, and more than half of Africa's entire population of over 1 billion people. So therefore, that's convening quite a serious convening power there in terms of the coverage of the continent. Now, this discussion today and the one last week, they're all taking place at a very, very important time, historic time, the time of COVID-19. And we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic is hitting populations and economies very, very hard, and that the energy sector, it's clear, has not been spared at all. IEA's latest World Energy Outlook, which is our flagship publication, shows that recent progress on energy access is now being reversed due to COVID-19. For the first time in 6 years, the number of people without access to electricity is set to increase. And there's also been an historic decline in energy investment, and this is set to drop by more than 30% in Africa this year. Now, IEA has been calling throughout the year that exceptional circumstances require an exceptional approach. And that's why the World Energy Outlook 2020 focuses on bold actions to accelerate clean energy transitions. There's a need to regain the momentum on energy access and to boost investment to transform Africa's energy landscape, as this is really key to the realization of Africa's Agenda 2063 structural transformation and goals of trying to really build a new and a better and a peaceful and more prosperous continent for all Africans. Now, one thing that came out from this meeting, which I wanted to say at the outset, is that we can achieve the goals we want to achieve if we really enhance and build much stronger strategic alliances between governments, business, international organizations, and civil society to accelerate clean energy transitions faster. And the IEA has also again been leading the calls for governments to make their recoveries as sustainable and resilient as possible, and to leave no one behind. So in that context, I want to now come to some of the key highlights of the ministerial forum discussions last week, okay? First, there was agreement on the absolutely critical role of the energy sector to reinvigorate economic growth and also to power Africa's transformation. A revitalized energy sector is key to Africa's economic transformation, and participants also agreed on the urgent need to enhance actions to ensure sustainable economic recovery and significantly scale up energy investments in Africa over the next 3 years in the wake of COVID-19. Second, there was also agreement on how the sector can best be enabled to do this. Now, how do we help the energy sector best ensure sustainable recovery? Now, for that, participants noted that the achievement of full access to modern energy by 2030 is achievable, but that this will require stable, consistent policies and also strong political will. They stressed the need for all global stakeholders to maintain focus on collective action and also to update their plans to step up the pace of universal access to electricity and modern cooking in Africa. Also, there was a call for African governments and their partners to continue to work together, closely together, to ensure this progress towards the achievement of SDG 7. Related to that, though, it was also acknowledged that the momentum behind the current and existing policy and investment plans is insufficient to meet the critical modern energy needs of Africa's population. In that sense, it was also noted with concern that COVID is really checking whatever progress we've had. And it's likely, unless we do something scaled up now, it's going to have a very long-term effect on the progress and the trends that we need to see moving in a different direction. Now that brings me now also to the third main point, which was related to money. Africa's energy sector needs much more financing. Financing investment is absolutely key to addressing the major challenges and also making the most of the opportunities there in the African energy space. And for that, African countries need more finance and more innovative finance and more innovative ways of getting the investments that are needed to scale up and to build the robust modern energy systems that are needed on the continent. Because the current challenges that exist include the following. Right now in the wake of COVID, reduced financing flows. There's also a lack of fiscal space for many countries. And we're seeing a slowdown in new investments in the energy sector due to COVID. And also for some countries, a significant increase or significant increases in the cost of borrowing. Now, it wasn't just a woe is us and these are the problems and these are the challenges. The meeting also addressed and had found agreement or consensus on some of the solutions. How do we move forward faster? Okay. First of all, it was agreed that we need to invest more time, more energy, more resources, and we need to scale up the pace. We must do things much faster. And one thing there that really needs to be looked at is how do we first and foremost tap the potential in Africa? It's clear that Africa has greatest potential now in solar on the continent. Solar is positioning itself to become the new global, as our executive director calls it, king of renewable power. And Africa can eventually become a really leading player in that. And so that, much more must be done to seize those opportunities. We also have of course, major opportunities and potential hydropower and also natural gas resources that could be used to support the renewed economic recovery and development and clean energy transitions on the continent. Now, going forward, before I conclude in terms of what came out of the meeting, the co-chair summary highlights the following as the top recommendations going forward. First, that partnership for a green and just transition is an absolute priority. Second, that despite the challenges posed by COVID-19, governments must now avoid any temptation to slow down the pace on energy access. And third, enhanced, better, multilateral, regional, and international cooperation can play a critical role in addressing the financing and investment challenges in the post-COVID-19 era. And I'll stop there right now for the initial kind of feedback from that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Max. I mean, that was a really comprehensive, I think, overall look at challenges and opportunities of what came out of this meeting really sets the scene for our conversation today. I mean, I think you touched on this already a little bit, but I wanted to know about what the three key, if you had to pick three big key action points that came out of this conversation, what would they be?
Well, first, money, the financing and the investment. You know, we all know, or those who follow the financial system know, there is money in the international system, okay? But it's not being channeled towards Africa at the scale that we need it. And often there are excuses are made, that Africa is risky and so forth. But we all know that in reality, it's just perception of risk in Africa. And actually returns from investments in Africa are pretty good and also are safer than many other regions of the continent. So money, let's get the money right. Let's boost the investment in Africa's energy sector. The second is related to partnership. Africa's energy challenges are not just an issue for Africa. So therefore we need not only closer partnership and closer harmonization of working together on the African continent, we also need closer relations between Africa and Europe and the rest of the world. And not in the sense that you're doing it as a favor to Africa, but you're doing it as something that needs to be done globally. And third, I think the whole issue of trade and the African continental free trade area and what potential that has to help Africa move faster down this road. So trade and regional integration are also very key. So those are my three takeaways really from the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Max. I think those are very clear and things we can be reflecting on over the course of the conversation. I'm going to turn now to the other participants on our panel today. A quick reminder before I do so to not forget to raise your virtual hand to ask a question or react or come into the debate. And my colleagues will let me know that you are eager to join the conversation. So turning to our expert panel now. We are joined by Olivia Coldry, who is the lead for energy finance and clean cooking at Sustainable Energy for All. Then we'll have Daniel Alexander Schroff, the acting director for renewable energy and energy efficiency at the advisor, to the vice president for power, energy, climate, and green growth at the African Development Bank. We've got Francesca Tiardiello, head of political scenarios and institutional support for business development for sub-Saharan Africa and Eurasia at ENI. And finally, Kanda Yumkala, who is the co-chair of the Africa-Europe Strategy Group on Sustainable Energy and the former CEO and UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All. So I think we can all agree we have some very knowledgeable people who will be talking to us today. We're going to start off with Olivia. Olivia, Sustainable Energy for All has recently released a report on energizing finance. What are the figures in your report telling us, and what should be done to close the energy finance and demand gap?
Thanks very much, Amanda. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here on behalf of SU4All, so thank you for inviting us. Before I launch into energizing finance findings, which are completely pertinent to today's discussion, I just want to react to a couple of really good points that Maximilian's made. One is about COVID-19. So we're in our fourth year now of publishing our energizing finance reports, but we published this year's work very much with COVID as our backdrop. This has really brought even greater attention to the importance of energy access, not just to improve people's livelihoods, as we all know, but also for powering healthcare services, including cold chains for a vaccine, which we hope is coming soon. So with this in mind, sort of we as a collective need to realise that action on the SDGs, particularly SDG 7, and recovery from COVID-19 share a really common thread, and that is sustained investment in sustainable energy. The other point that Maximilian made, which is a really good one, is about total volume of finance needed. I mean, it's on its face a big number, 40 billion a year, the IEA tells us in aggregate, which is going to be needed to get to universal energy access by 2030. But if we think about it, it's a relatively small price to pay to reach a goal that's going to really transform people's lives. It can and it will. So if we put $40 billion a year in the overall scheme of things, it's a very strong investment, not just to achieving SDG 7, but to achieving many of the other SDGs that SDG 7 can unlock. So with that in mind, let me talk through our energizing finance work. So this is a multi-year research series. It's a flagship research at SE4All. And the numbers are quite sobering. So if we're going to accelerate sustainable energy for all, we're needing to get to the volume and speed of disbursement of this finance that we need. What we saw, we've been doing this for a few years now. We looked at 20 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia with significant energy access deficits. So we call these high impact countries. What we saw in 2018, which is the year for which data is most recently available to us, is a slight uptick in finance for electrification, which is great news, but we're still orders of magnitude from where we need to be. So in the 20 countries that I've described with the biggest electricity access deficits, we saw about $34 billion tracked in 2018. That's against an IEA estimate of $41 billion each year through to 2030 for residential access only. So if we think of it in that way, we saw only about a third of that amount of money going to the 20 countries in Africa and Asia that we track. So we're still a long way away. The clean cooking picture, which is an often forgotten or sort of less amplified dimension of SDG 7, is even more chronic. So in 2018, we saw about $131 million go into the clean cooking sector in these 20 countries against an IEA estimate of about $6 billion required. So we're sort of worlds away from where we need to be on clean cooking finance. The next point to highlight is that finance is highly concentrated and it's not going to the countries that need it most. So sub-Saharan Africa is home to 70% of the world's population without access to electricity. But in 2018, Sub-Saharan African countries received in aggregate $8.5 billion of finance. So that's not just one country, but all 14 of the Sub-Saharan African countries we tracked. Of those 14, 7 countries received less than $100 million each. So in the context of the overall global finance flows, that's really a pittance and needs to be scaled up quite dramatically. Another point I want to make, which is very relevant to today's discussion, and particularly the efforts of the high-level dialogue in COP26 later next year, is where the money is going sectorally. We quite alarmingly saw an increase in finance for fossil fuel investments in 2018. So the highest proportion of electricity finance for the longest time we've been doing this research, up from 5 billion to over 21 billion in 2018. And at the same time, finance for grid-connected renewables projects declined. So that obviously is contrary to everything we're trying to achieve with the energy transition, everything that we're trying to achieve under the Africa-Europe strategy and in COP26 efforts. So we really need to have that conversation about why money is continuing to flow to fossil fuel projects, particularly coal. Turning to clean cooking, and I know my fellow panelist, Kande, is very close to this issue and will likely have more to say about it. There is really a woeful lack of volume and innovation and diversity in finance for clean cooking solutions. So not just an absolute lack of volume for this critical dimension of SDG 7, but also lack of innovation. So it's mostly finance from international sources, mostly donors, and mostly going in the form of grants to a couple of technology solutions. So we really need to think hard as an international community about diversifying both the flavour of the money, if you like, and to the energy solutions it's going to help us close the gap on clean cooking. So this is really a public health emergency that is not necessarily treated as such, and we need to elevate it to the status of that emergency. The final point I want to make in my opening remarks is around disbursement. So I've talked so far about commitments, finance commitments to energy access in Africa and Asia. Obviously, that money is not going to have an impact on the ground unless it's actually dispersed. So it's one thing to make an announcement or a commitment. It's another thing to disperse funds on the ground. And that's the only way we're going to achieve real change and real impact. Our work this year found that over half, 58% of all energy finance commitments or finance for energy access commitments are delayed. So that's well over half. And almost half of all projects that have energy finance committed to them are delayed. So not only are we way short of the volume of finance required to get to universal access, half of that money is not flowing at the time it's been committed to flow. So that's something really we want to think about. In addition to increasing overall volumes of finance, we really need to be addressing how that money is efficiently and quickly dispersed. I'll leave it there because I'm very keen to hear from the other panelists as well. But Amanda, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Olivia. Thanks for this kind of grim picture, actually, of the financing situation. Not feeling very upbeat, but I think that's why we're all here, so we can find solutions and kind of fix this going forward. Before we turn to the next panelist, I want to ask you one more question. We've got next year, for the first time in 40 years, a UN high-level dialogue on energy coming up. How can governments, business, civil society across Africa and Europe, how can we be working together? We're in our last decade of action to achieve the SDGs. Between that and the upcoming high-level dialogue, what do we need to do together to advance this common agenda for progress?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda, for the follow-up. I guess a few thoughts, and we can talk more about this. The first is I'm really glad civil society has been highlighted in the conversation. So this is a crucial stakeholder group that's very close to end users on the ground, and in my view, in SE for All's view, not necessarily engaged enough. So, a first point would be the importance of engaging and listening to civil society to advance this discussion. They know end users very well. The second point is the importance of African institutions and African-led initiatives, and I want to highlight the African Union's work in that respect. We were very glad to work with the African Union last year in terms of our integrated electrification planning efforts, and that led to the African Union adopting an SE for All recommendation on integrated approaches to national electrification in its Cairo declaration last year. So in terms of policy reform efforts, really important to have Africa-led initiatives run by African institutions. And the substance of that recommendation around integrated approaches to energy access that incorporate not just old models of energy access, if you like, so grid-connected solutions, but also diverse energy access solutions, particularly decentralized energy, is really important. You've mentioned the high-level dialogue for energy. This is a really important event later next year, which my CEO, Damilola, co-chairs, along with the administrator of UNDP. This is going to generate new commitments from governments, the private sector, and others through an energy compact mechanism. And that's, we hope, going to help create a radical transformation of energy systems. So we really want governments and private sector organizations to commit to really accelerating their transitions. You've also mentioned COP26 at the end of next year. This is a crucial COP, as we all know. The COP26 Energy Transition Council, which Damilola also co-chairs, is very much focused on phasing out coal power and creating clean energy offers. So in the context of what I've just said about fossil fuel financing, very, very important to have a robust discussion about where money is still going to fossil fuels and how to accelerate the phase out. So the private sector is well ahead of the curve on that, but to the extent that's still going, we really need to have that inclusive conversation around how this can be accelerated. So perhaps I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much. No, that's perfect. I think that's what we need to hear. I'm going to turn now to Daniel Schroth from the AFDB. Daniel, you have been able to hear now from the International Energy Agency. We've heard from Sustainable Energy for All. Given the latest figures you've heard, the statements you've heard, how is the African Development Bank planning to achieve progress towards SDG 7 and the African Union's Agenda 2063 ambitions?
Thank you very much. And first of all, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, to everyone. It's a pleasure being part of this exciting panel discussion. Indeed, I think Max and Olivia highlighted quite a number of important trends, and most of them are not encouraging. We see that progress, particularly on the energy access side, as an impact of COVID-19 is decreasing. So we have seen over the previous years progress being made, at least on the electricity access side. And our understanding of the analysis of IEA is that the forecast is that for the first time in a few years, there's actually going to be an increase. And that is, of course, deeply troubling to everyone, and sort of brings us further away from achieving SDG 7 by 2030. I think the only positive element from the presentation, also from the IEA, is that I think the COVID-19 pandemic is sort of accelerating to some extent the energy transition. You see certainly an increase or a substantial decrease going forward in terms of investments into fossil fuels. And that is, of course, a real opportunity for Africa, given the significant potential of renewables that obviously Africa has. I think, let me just react to a couple of points that have been mentioned from our perspective. One point is around obviously COVID-19 and the impact that it's having, particularly on the energy access side, and really requires concerted efforts from all stakeholders to provide the support, for example, to energy access companies in the decentralized energy access space. I'm pleased to just mention, given that this is very recent, our board just approved yesterday the COVID-19 off-grid recovery platform, which is a $50 million blended finance platform to basically catalyze financing for energy access companies. We have provided through our Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa 20 million into this platform in concessional terms. And we're trying to leverage the capacity of some of the energy access funds that are already active, that are already providing critical support to energy access companies across the continent to help them be able to provide financing at more concessional terms and help those companies both cover with the effects of the pandemic, but also help sort of to them to scale up and build back better. So that's one concrete example of where such an intervention can really have an impact. And we invite others to join this innovative platform to help those energy access companies deal with the pandemic. Just one other example, I want to be very concrete. It was highlighted by Olivia that one sector that is often neglected is the clean cooking sector. And certainly the African Development Bank is no exception to that rule. It's just a sector that in many respects is still sort of lacking maturity. Many of the companies, even the more advanced ones, are still at a very early stage. Some of the investments are too small for an institution such as ourselves to be able to invest in directly. But we have just last week, again, something very recent, been able to approve in our investment through our Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa and funds from the European Commission that are channeled through the African Development Bank in the first dedicated clean cooking fund, the Spark Plus Fund, on which we have worked together with the Global Alliance on Clean Cooking. That is a fund to really support private sector enterprises along the entire clean cooking value chain. And I think that is certainly an important step to move away from just this grant support, the small scale operations, I think that Olivia alluded to. So I think that's another concrete example of what we are currently trying to support. And clearly, these are examples that need to be scaled up. In themselves, they are still remain a drop in the ocean. But I believe this is where, as Max said, partnerships are so critical, including partnerships, of course, with Europe. Maybe just one last example that I just want to mention. I think it touches on various points that have been highlighted in terms of strategic alliance, also seizing the solar potential that Africa has. One initiative that we've been driving very actively in support with many others is the Desert to Power initiative, really trying to seize the tremendous solar potential across the Sahel. We have in particular initial high-level...
Oop, Daniel, you have cut out for a second. Let's see. Oh, we've lost Daniel. All right, we've lost Daniel, unfortunately. Hopefully he'll come back into the conversation shortly. He can log back in. Maybe when Daniel logs back in, someone on my team can let me know he's here and we can come back to him. So we will take this opportunity to move on to our next speaker, which is Francesca from Eni. Francesca, thanks for joining us today as well. I'd like to hear a little bit from you about what the bottlenecks are that you see as hampering the development of energy solutions across Africa at the moment.
Hi everyone, thanks Amanda, and thanks for having me at this together with this panel of experts in discussing the topic of sustainable energy in Africa. Which is very close to our company. Just for those who are not familiar with Eni is an integrated energy company. We are engaged in the full spectrum of energy, so from the oil and gas exploration and production to the renewable energy generation to the distribution, commercialization, and green chemistry as well. Africa is our second home country. We've got, half of our conventional energy production comes from Africa. We've got 1 gigawatt, soon to become 1.5 gigawatt of power production in Africa. We've got our first forest conservation project in Africa, in Zambia, and already, studies and talks with governments to launch other similar projects in Ghana, in Mozambique, and in other countries. The other comment I wanted to make before I go into my key messages is clearly Africa is a continent of 54 states, which are very different and vary across, for natural endowment and for regulatory framework. So, clearly the comments can tackle the commonalities that we see, but we have to acknowledge the great differences among some of the African countries. So I will speak in terms of, to your question, responding to your question, what are the hurdles or the obstacles that hamper the development of new energy solutions? Clearly when we speak about energy, we know that power is only one component of energy. Then we have many other needs that have to be, energy needs that have to be satisfied in heating and transportation. I'll focus on the power sector, which I know best, and on the sub-Saharan context. So basically, I think we can divide. The main families of obstacles are, on one side, the inadequacy of the grid infrastructure, and on the other side, the financial stress of the players in this domain, of the utilities in this domain. So if we go to the grid inadequacy, as many of the speakers and of the participants, I'm sure, are aware, there's if you compare the picture of the networks of the grid infrastructure in Africa and in Europe, you will see there's a stunning difference in terms of kilometers of grid, and also in terms of the efficiency of this grid. So we know that there's a high share of transmission and distribution leakages and defaults, which make the functioning of the system very, very inefficient. And the power that even is available is not easily channeled to the end users. Another thing which
Francesca,
I think is really...
Sorry to interrupt you just before you keep going. I hear your sound is a little low. If you could bring the microphone a little bit closer, that would be great. Thanks so much.
Is it better now?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'll do like this. So the other thing I wanted to highlight is the issue of power trade and interconnection. Some countries, as you are aware, are endowed with vast resources, both if in terms of gas or in terms of wind and sun, as it was already mentioned. But the development of local markets is hampered by the size of these markets. If we were able to take a regional perspective, so to be if a country was able to effectively trade and export its electricity, it would be much easier for these resources to be developed. So we were engaging with the power pools, with the different power pools in Africa, and some of these are very able to effectively trade power among the members. Some are weaker. And we believe this is one of the areas where the new relationship, even between Africa and Europe, could be focused on building the capacity and making trade more effective between African states. If we go to the other family of hurdles and bottlenecks, the one about financial stress, you know that, you're aware that the COVID has made more difficult a situation which already was very difficult. Tariffs, power tariffs are subsidized in many countries, and they do not reflect the cost of generation, of transmission, and of distribution, which makes the power markets, structurally not in balance. According to data from some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, from the World Bank, just 2 out of 39 utilities in sub-Saharan Africa are able to pay for their costs and to make some some positive cash flow. Of course, this makes, I mean, for private investments, this makes many of the power markets too risky to invest in. I agree with Maximilian before that there's an issue of perception of risks, and I mean, all of us, we need to develop a first-hand knowledge about the African markets. But it's true that there is an issue with the ability of, the ability of power markets to reward the investments. So despite, the commitments, despite the commitments in the international arena, and despite also the commitment of the private sector, that as it was mentioned by previous speakers, many of the private sector are ahead of the curve. They've taken, like ourselves, the achievement of SDGs in their mission, together with the other more common objectives. But clearly, if the market fundamentals are not there, it will be very difficult to increase the share of investments flowing to Africa, which is an enormous risk. As the governments, but also the private sector, is accelerating the decarbonization path. So everyone is looking for cleaner, more sustainable investments. And if the African markets are not able to provide such conditions, then we run the risk that they will be left behind, despite the many opportunities that they present, and that globally and as a humankind, we will not achieve the SDG 7. And I will stop on this for my first remarks.
Thanks, Francesca. So you were talking about how the private sector is really ahead of the curve in some places. What opportunities are you, as a member of the private sector, seeing to step up and improve the power market? Not just for yourself, but private sector in general.
In general, yeah, okay. So I'll say maybe two things. One is keep a focus on African markets. So dedicate teams, dedicate efforts, and dedicate resources to really develop a first-hand understanding of the risks and the opportunities of African markets, and in order to be able to operate in those markets. And second, I would say get engaged. So get engaged with civil society and governments and institutions locally, but also internationally. And make sure that there is the right circulation of information and also coordination of efforts. We are aware, we're engaged with several institutions, also the multilateral, and I here commend the work that the African Development Bank is doing, also to facilitate the share of experiences among the different African states. And for the private sector, I believe that it's very important to get engaged in dialogue, share problems, but also solutions, maybe taken also from other parts of the world that have worked, and might offer also solutions for the problems that we're facing in sub-Saharan Africa.
Super. No, thank you, Francesca, so much for coming in on that. I am told that Daniel is back with us. Daniel, is that true?
Yes, that is true.
That is true. That's great news.
Excellent timing, of course, to have a power cut in the middle of a discussion around power on the African continent. But yes, I'm back.
That says it all right there. No, Daniel, I don't know if you wanted to finish up any remarks that you had before, but just to maybe keep you moving a little bit, you were talking about how how we have one example of European Commission funds going through the African Development Bank towards clean cooking. What opportunities in general do you see for Africa and Europe to work together to enhance sustainable energy cooperation?
No, thank you for that follow-on question. I think there are quite a number of opportunities. I think one is indeed building on my earlier comment, and I think this is where also the European Commission has been instrumental in the last couple of years, is to be able to provide these blending or these resources that are concessional, that can be blended with resources to other institutions such as the African Development Bank, but of course not exclusively. with a view to be able to bring in more private sector, more private capital into African markets, into African projects. That is quite an important aspect, and we have very good examples of that type of collaboration. Maybe just to mention one additional example. We were also with the critical support in terms of first loss junior equity that have been provided by the European Commission. We were able to launch the Facility for Energy Inclusion, which is really looking to support companies in the decentralized energy access space. It's already operational. The off-grid window of the Facility for Energy Inclusion has been able to provide support to a number of companies, helping, for example, BBOS expand their activities in Rwanda with local currency lending, financing, inventory financing operation for Sun Culture, which is a Kenya-based designer and distributor of solar water pumps, and other projects as well. So these are critical type of operations that are really facilitated with these types of resources. So also in FAY, we were able to bring in more private sector oriented funds. Another example of collaboration, I think, is really around obviously the sharing of experiences, including, I think, increasingly, obviously, Europe has made a lot of progress over the last 20, 30 years around creation of the single European energy market. Obviously, Africa is in many respects different, but I think there is a potential also sort of to look how can a more structured market be created in Africa. We have, of course, the regional markets with the various power pools sort of as a building block, and it's good to see that there is some initial discussion now happening in this regard, including earlier this week in the context of the specialized technical committee that the African Union is organizing. So I think that's also another key area. And thirdly, and I think obviously Kande will be best placed to talk to that, but we had last year a very intensive discussion with numerous stakeholders around how to scale up investments in Africa. We've been working on, in the context of this high-level platform for sustainable energy investments in Africa, was a very good report, I think, that was launched at our Africa Investment Forum last November. And I think there are many good recommendations that now sort of need to move towards the implementation stage, including, I just want to pick out two of those recommendations that were made, which affect, of course, collaboration between Europe and Africa. One was really to focus on how to scale up and replicate funding structures with a track record of delivery. I think that's a very important one because there's always new instruments, etc. Of course, in some instances, this is required because certain aspects are not properly covered, but in many instances, it would actually be a lot more efficient if one were to provide additional support for funds or structures that are already delivering on the ground and help those entity structures to scale up. And they can scale up quickly because they have an established machinery already in place. And the second one, just very quickly, was a recommendation was also made around supporting African countries to expand the use of renewables for addressing baseload requirements. And I think this directly links to the whole discussion around the energy transition, including all the conversations that will be happening in the context of the Energy Transition Council. Sort of how can we provide support to African countries to strengthen the networks, to include storage capabilities, to be able to basically have alternatives for meeting baseload requirements. And just to highlight that we were able, end of last year, to convert our Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa into a larger blended finance facility. And one of the three areas of focus is around green baseload. So we do have one facility that is there to provide support to African countries in this regard. Let me stop there.
Thanks so much, Daniel, and I'm glad you could come back into the debate and we didn't lose you for too long. I'm going to turn now to Kanda because it seems that all roads lead to Kanda in this conversation. Everyone's been making reference to how you'll be able to speak so well to so many of these points. Before I do, just a quick reminder to everyone, if you do want to come to ask a question, because we'll move on to the questions, comments, reflections shortly, please remember to raise your virtual hand. Kanda, please join our conversation. I think we'd like to hear from you very much, your reflections on what you've heard thus far. We've heard a lot about how Africa and Europe can work together. What are your views on how we can be sharing best practices to support the countries across Africa in achieving ambitious energy transitions at the scale we're demanding?
Thank you very much for including me in this conversation, and good morning to my colleagues on the panel. We've all been soldiers working in this area for some time. Of course, what I heard from Maximilian was worrisome. I was in their forum last week as a speaker as well, with the declining levels of investments, and also the first time in 7 years that in fact more people went without access to electricity, reversing some of the gains we've made over time. I think my colleagues have covered everything. Let me just piggyback and highlight on a few, since we're talking particularly about EU-Africa partnership. Daniel made in the closing part, made the central point. Can we build on some of the successes we already have? It is very tempting every few years that a new instrument is introduced for financing. We have some business models that work. We have specialized funds established at the African Development Bank. How do we ensure that we put more funds into those vehicles? Looking at the ADB now over the last 10, 15 years, or the World Bank SMAP, they've built a number of business models. They've worked with countries over time. What we need is additional replenishments now to make those funds work and do more, have more impact. So let us build on some of what exists already than trying to all the time invent new ones. So I would strongly emphasize that in the partnership with Europe, we look at the tools that ADB already has, specialized funds they've established. Same with ESMA, same with the European Union, their own vehicles. Second, most of our colleagues, including our colleague from NI, talked about building markets. Energy markets are not easy to establish. It took a long time for Europe, with good public money, to build energy markets, give confidence to private sector to want to enter those markets. Therefore, we need strong partnership with Europe to build African energy markets. In this regard, working with regulators, and in a number of sub-Saharan African countries, the regulators are very new. Some of them were established just 5 years ago, when the whole push for unbundling of the sector was started. So we have to support the regulators to help build support for integrated planning as governments plan for.
Kanda, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We lost sound for just a couple minutes, so I think we've lost probably the last minute of what you were saying.
The main point I was making is
so
integrated planning. Yeah, we have to support integrated planning. One of the key recommendations we had from our work last year for the Sustainable Energy Investment Platform was integrated planning. Countries plan for 20 years, and that plan should include grid expansion and opportunities for off-grid solutions, doing the analysis, where would the grid not go in the next 10, 20 years, mapping out those areas, giving also good data on population density and other requirements that mini-grid and off-grid operators would want to have. We should not wait for the off-grid operators to do those analyses. It should be mainstreamed within planning for electrification in general. The good point made by NI was the utilities. It is still a problem. The utilities are gatekeepers. As she mentioned, only 2 are profitable right now in sub-Saharan Africa. We have to address this head on. Sector governance. There's still corruption in some of those utilities. There's still a lot of problems with them being able to collect revenues. There's energy theft. How do we make these utilities to be in the black, and then find a way in which they can also partner with European utilities that want to invest in Africa? We have to address that. I think many of us avoid it because it's a sensitive issue in a number of countries, even mine right now. We have issues with our utilities. There's a lot of complaints. However, they also say governments don't pay back. And the biggest debtors to our utilities are the government institutions. So dealing with this problem of insolvency of utilities is going to be crucial. And finally, we talked about finance. Daniel gave some indications of how the EU has been very instrumental in helping to de-risk investments coming in. We're going to need a higher volume of investments, of course, but we're going to need that muscle of the EU to combine some of the aid funds coming into countries with private sector money, to give confidence to private sector to want to invest in these markets. I give you a case. We all praise what the Moroccans have done with Desertec, concentrated solar power project there. I know I've been there, and I've been with the World Bank as they looked at how CIF funds, the climate investment funds, helped to de-risk that investment. It was almost $500 million of multilateral funds that helped to make sure that project could take off. The private sector were ready, but that $500 million was crucial in making sure the tariffs were not high, in covering some of the gaps in financing that existed, that gave confidence to the private sector to want to continue, in addition to local public funds. My last comment is on clean cooking. I'm happy most of my colleagues raised it. And look at the minuscule amount of money that is going in, 113 million. That is a drop in the ocean, but it also points to the fact that we've not taken it serious. It's the one area where we've made no progress in the last 15 years. Still 2.8 billion people without power, without access to clean cooking. In Africa, that's about 900 million people without access to clean cooking solutions. The impact on women, the impact on the forest, and now household air pollution is amongst the top 3 causes of morbidity in the population in Africa. We have to address this. And we have to do for clean cooking everything we've done for electrification. Good planning, good public policy, financing for de-risking, but also looking at it as an investment problem, not a charity problem. The amounts of money going in to deal with clean cooking are all charity funds. What do I call charity funds? Oh, we recognize it's a problem, throw 3 million at it. No, we have to plan for that sector. We have to do good public policy, but also the leadership in the African countries have to see it as an important problem. Just 2 weeks ago, a major donor in a country told me, yes, Dr. Yunkela, we realize that clean cooking is a problem, but our interest right now is electrification. We have to change that thinking. It is both. Lack of clean cooking is a silent tsunami killing our women and children. But in addition, in the context of COVID, imagine these millions of women in Africa or in Bangladesh or in India that already have pulmonary problems, and you have a pandemic of COVID. So I just wanted to underscore the underfunding of clean cooking and the need for bigger political action. And this is one thing we hope in our strategy group that we've established now, that the Mo Ibrahim Foundation and the Friends of Europe have established, that in fact this issue we will highlight and will bring the right knowledge and the skills together to be able to push it further as a priority area for energy access. Over to you.
Thank you so much. That's all super useful to this discussion. I think also our strategy groups going forward are going to have a lot of food for thought and a lot to discuss. I'm also really glad you brought up the gender dimension at the end, because that's something I don't think we've hit on yet today in our conversation, and it's something we definitely need to be keeping in mind across the board. How are women and girls particularly affected by this challenge? I'm going to turn now to the Q&A with the many participants we have in this room. I see Jeffrey wants to come in. Jeffrey, if you could make sure you unmute your microphone.
Thank you. I hope you are hearing me.
Yes, we're hearing you fine. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, thank you so much for this important debate. I think I will just comment or maybe question on two issues. Maybe let me just highlight what are the trends we are also seeing here as players in the industry.
Jeffrey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you introduce your organizational affiliation?
Okay, thank you so much. I'm representing Global Solar, which is based in Zimbabwe.
Great, thank you.
And we are currently I'm in Harare, so we are doing a lot of installations in Zimbabwe, both in the urban and also rural and marginalized communities. So my contribution first was to just maybe highlight the trends that we have seen during the COVID when we had lockdown. We had more people moving from urban centers going back to the rural areas because there was no more means of living in cities because almost everything was closed. So for the first time in a couple of years, we've seen a lot of urban to rural migration, which meant also that the need of energy, especially in rural areas, also increased because we had more people there going there. And in these communities, we don't have a lot of access to energy because access of energy is more concentrated in rural in urban areas. So which also created another urgent need for the rural communities to have access to energy. If you also checked what also happened also in our context is there was more of learning in terms of education as we look at the cross-cutting issues. More of the education happening now online, virtually, and the same communities, the same children in the rural areas, they could not access because they don't have energy. Let's not talk even of connectivity. They don't have the gadgets that are required. They don't have the energy which should power for example, if they have to use computers or whatever, phones, which created a burden. So I'm just trying to say, at the moment, COVID has created a very big challenge for all of us, which we need to even move with speed. So I just want to challenge, I've heard from Olivia or from Daniel that, yes, before in January this year, the situation we're moving at a pace, but I think we need to speed in terms of investment at a higher pace. Then when we go also to clean cooking, which Kandi was also touching, I think we are not doing a lot because we, as I've said, we had more people in the rural areas, more burden to the environment, people cutting more trees now because they have to earn a living there. So I think we also have to do more on clean cooking. I was just researching on biogas, which if you check in Africa, we have our store of value is animals. People have got a bit of animals, of cattle, they've got a bit of hens, which is very important in terms of a raw material for biogas. So I was thinking if also more investment is put or channeled towards biogas, which is a proven concept, but which was not commercialized at a faster and a higher rate, because almost everyone has got an animal which could be also help. If you check, the residue of a biogas digester can also be used as fertilizer. So I'm thinking, let's also push investment in technology, which is already proven that it works. Biogas does not only work for cooking, it can also work for the fridge, it can also work for the lighting. So I believe if also resources are channeled towards that, that can also help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Thanks for those points. And we will come back to the speakers in a little bit. We'll collect a couple questions so that they can kind of respond to to your reflections. I'd like to come now to Ivana. Ivana, if you could unmute your microphone, introduce yourself and your organization. Ivana? Ivana's not here? Okay, well, we'll hope to hear from her on another occasion. Benjamin, same to you. Unmute your microphone. Let us know who you are, what you do.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and I'm serving as the global focal point for SDG 7 Youth Constituency. And we are part of the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. And we support youth engagement in the energy space with SE for All, IRENA, REN21, HLPF, and other spaces. And recently we launched the Youth Sustainable Energy Hub, which is a global platform for youth projects in sustainable energy. And what we've seen is really amazing work being done by different projects submitted from Africa, over 50% of them coming from that continent. On the other hand, we see that there is a lot of obstacles that young people are facing in sustainable energy sector. COVID-19 being one of them, when sustainable energy businesses are not recognized as essential, and then are not allowed to operate due to stay-home orders. And so taking in mind that, but also general demographic situation where over 60% of Africa's population is under 25, we necessarily need to recognize the role of young people in clean energy transition and see how we can advance it and work together. There were a few references in the session so far to youth, but I would be curious to hear from the speakers what are their ideas or what are programs they are seeing, how we can further streamline the role of young people in clean energy transition and in all parts of it, because I mentioned primarily business and product development side, but it's also necessary to have them in policy design and implementation. There's also need to be capacity building and education. So these are different areas that we need to think about and make sure that this is a meaningful inclusion and not only a PR activity. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. I think you're bringing up a really important point. I'm glad this is coming into the debate, the role of youth and making sure we're meaningfully including them in the conversation. We'll come back to that in a bit, but first we go to Nasser. Nasser, if you could unmute your microphone and let us know who you are. Oh, sorry, your microphone's still muted, unfortunately. Not quite. Oh, there we go.
It's working.
Perfect, that works fine. Come on in.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am Nasser Nafa. I'm currently working as community manager in a communication agency and also a member of an organization called Atlas for Development, and we are working on African Agenda 2063. What I would love to say is I am pursuing science, and I know that how much is important to tackle the issue of climate change and also give an answer to the needs of Africa when it comes to the economical development and also the needs of energy. We know that Africa is growing and we will need more fossil fuel energy, and we know that that energy is money for Africa. And Africa needs money for right now to boost its economy and to make an impact in their societies. But what we are struggling with is that Africa hasn't enough infrastructure. We have the problem of corruption, as Candy said and mentioned, and it's really an important point because not all African countries are monitoring their finance, their financial budgets, and also the corporations with the European Union. And the third point is the problem of using and giving the value to what we are having right now. The problem is priorities. We have a lot of priorities to make Africa great, but also we have the problem of utilizing these priorities and giving them values. When we talk about, for example, energy, we are saying, yeah, we need energy. We need to buy fossil oil to get money, but at the same time, we are seeing the problem of climate change. We would love to tackle the problem of money and to give finance and having finance to our projects that Africa could make and could do to make their economic more powerful. At the same time, we are having the same problem that is coming and is approaching in the near future. So for me, what could really European Union could help in that point? How really to tackle all that problems that we have problems right now and the coming problems that will in the near future. How the European Union could really help Africa? We know that the European Union has a lot of things to say, and with with all the experience that the European Union has, but also Africa it's still in lacking a lot of things, especially when it comes to the public strategies and the public funds and so on. So really, how could really European Union could help in that point?
Thanks so much, NASA. Great points raised. I'm going to come now to Frederick. Frederick, if you unmute your microphone and let us know who you are.
Yes.
Hi, Frederick.
Yeah, my name is Frederick Moyer. I'm Secretary General of the Jobs for Africa Foundation. This is a foundation that seeks to support vulnerable youth and women in Africa by creating opportunities, building viable value chains, and this is critically important, especially when it comes to energy, skills development, and entrepreneurship. I just wanted to follow up on one of the issues that was put forward about providing energy access, particularly to very marginalized rural communities. I remember one time engaging with the EU Commission when they set up the two initiatives, Agrify and Electrify, which is meant to sort of, and I think the African Development Bank talked about this, trying to bring in, blended finance. When you put in some money that provides opportunities for the private sector to be able to go into, very underprivileged areas, especially in rural areas. Shouldn't we put more funding into such initiatives so that we can attract more private sector investments in such areas? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Frederick. We've got one last question coming in from Constance Khan from the EIB. Constance, welcome. Constance,
Thank you.
there
Thank you very
are.
much.
Hi, nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm here. Nice to see you too. And I think it's actually
Constance, I think
the last comment that was made relevant for the issue that I would get to. Yeah.
No, sorry, we're just having a bit of a trouble with your connection, I think. But just keep going. Let's see what happens.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm Constance with the European Investment Bank. We are the EU bank, and we actually took a very important decision last year to phase out our financing for unabated fossil fuels. And we discussed, also that commitment at the Financing Commons Summit last couple of weeks ago with the other 450 public development banks to see, what we can do, further together to be able to finance really this green transition. I heard a few things that resonate very much with us. It's the point about money, the need for investments, the need for partnerships, and also the right investment environment. We're going through difficult, I think, discussions for the next EU budget, and I think it has been underlined how important it is to combine, EU money or EU grants with finance to further attract private investors. So I would only underline the importance for blended finance. But I think there is also a reality check. I think we also have to spend perhaps a bit more energy in the coming period to ensure that the money that we have works better. And there are, some initiatives like we have undertaken with the African Development Bank on Boost Africa, where we are really, joining forces in a strategic and a more long-term manner. We're doing the same, with the EU national development agencies to ensure that we can, better share risks and do more, with the resources that we have. And my question is a bit more related to, what indeed can we do to share better the knowledge that we have about financial instruments that work, and make sure that these can work even better, and how can we focus even more on the opportunities that are there in Africa, whether it is for renewable energy, and we know that the solar potential is way undertapped, to make sure that we remove any obstacles for supporting the green and digital transition in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Constance, for coming in. I'm going to go back now to our speakers for their kind of reflections and points based on all the questions we've received. I mean, we've had a lot of interesting comments, biogas uses, challenges and opportunities of COVID-19, the role of youth, the impact of corruption on infrastructure, ways of prioritizing our agenda, energy access in rural communities, and how we can really improve knowledge sharing. So there's a lot. So I'm just going to go one by one through you and come back in on the points that you think are most important to make. I think I'll start with Max. Max.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to speak a bit about this EU-Africa as well in my response. And I'm speaking now with my kind of more personal and my 30 years experience and my background had on more than just recently IEA, although I work at IEA. So if you those don't know, I'm not an energy expert. My background, my background academically and most of my work has been economic history, international trade, economic affairs, and political economy. Okay, and I think that one thing we need to be mindful of, and it came out from the question of Benjamin and also Nasser and others. Benjamin talked about youth. About 12 years ago, I worked in Addis on the African Development Forum on youth. I really want to say youth must have more say in the room. Youth must be, involving in policy, investment for youth. But then some young person got up who was doing research and saying, well, the demographics, Africa is a young continent. So actually it's a tautology to be saying that youth must be involved. Africa is a young continent. If you look at some of our most famous leaders of the last 50 years, they were very young people when they took power. Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, Meles Zenawi in Ethiopia. So many of them are young people. So the youth have a critical role to play, not outside, but inside. And that said, also demographically, this is something Europe must be mindful of. If we look, and again, this comes back to my issue about Europe helping Africa. It's not about Europe helping Africa. It is about partnership. But it's also partnership where Europe must be working with Africa in enlightened self-interest. Now, the economic historian in me knows, if you look at the 19th century, that major population move from Europe to Australia, to Africa, to North America, those were because there were population pressures and political pressures in Europe, which forced Europeans to go around the world. And at the same time, money moved around the world. Money moved around the world not to help, but to build infrastructure and that would benefit the regions those Europeans were now in, and also Europe. And I'd like us to see a similar kind of approach to Africa. No more talk about how do you help Africa. How do we build the modern energy systems in Africa that we need for Africa and for the world? It's the youngest continent by the end of this century. It'll be a continent that'll be dynamic and that can add so much to the world, okay, and so much to Europe. But it can only do that if it has modern energy. Women need to be able to cook with electricity, so they're not dying from health issues. So it's a mindset change that I think it really needs to happen. That I really can't stress that enough, that we need to be working together as Africans and Europeans and the rest of the world in a way that is enlightened self-interest. So the last point about investment, again, economic historian in me knows, the money that flowed around the world in the early 20th century went everywhere. It went to Japan, it went to Europe, it went to Africa, and it went to places where there was a feeling the bankers felt that they could put money in for the long term, build railroads, build bridges, and make returns. That potential is also there in Africa, and it needs to happen at a scale. And I really would like to see a mindset change from the financiers in Europe and around the world as they approach the pension funds, as they approach Africa. I leave it there for now.
Max, thanks so much.
Please.
No,
Moderator, this is Kande.
Hi, Kande.
Wanted to jump in.
Sure, come on in, Kande. Are you? But we can't hear you, I'm sorry. If you...
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, please. I guess you have a response to Max. Come on in.
Sorry, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but Max, that's really the issue here. for those of us who will be co-chairing this new strategy group on energy, that's the point we want to hammer, that it is in Europe's enlightened self-interest that we establish this win-win partnership for an energy revolution in Africa, so that yes, we can create jobs in Africa, we can create markets that will be important markets for Europe as well. If we're planning, looking ahead, 2063, we're looking at adding another billion Africans to our continent. That's a huge market, but it could be a potential problem if, in fact, we don't have the jobs, we don't have the prosperity we need, and of course, waves of these kids will come to Europe. So, Max, you're dead on, and that's why we talk about investments, whether it's in clean cooking or in expansion of electrification. We view it as an investment proposition with a good value proposition that is profitable for both sides, Africa and Europe. It cannot be an aid charity model now. COVID has shown how interconnected the world is and how interconnected we are. This is the time to take advantage of innovations in energy systems, to learn from Europe, so that yes, there's a mutually beneficial partnership that is win-win. So I just wanted to hammer that. Thanks, Max, for raising it. But that's the perspective, because if we look at an aid approach, it will be small amounts of money, piloting projects, doing more studies, doing more forums. Now it's about real business partnerships. And yes, we Africans have an obligation to do what is right, the right regulations. We must aggressively fight corruption too. The governance has to be clear. The visions have to be long-term. Stability in public policy is crucial if we're going to get those big investments, so that, yes, Max, we establish that kind of partnership that you and I and the youth want to see. In that respect, two areas we didn't talk much about: energy for productive uses. I think our colleague who talked about the jobs issue touched on it a little bit, but also energy and digitalization. Bringing the digital platform and energy together to deal with payment systems, all the issues related to data collection for better planning is going to be crucial. Over to you, but thanks, Max.
Thanks so much, Kanda, for coming in. I was going to give you the final word, but we'll see if maybe you have a couple extra points to bring in towards the end of the conversation. And thanks to you both for being, absolutely forthright and straight and to the point. This is something that we have to change. Olivia, I'm going to come back to you now for some reflections.
Thanks a lot, Amanda, and thanks very much for the great discussion. I'm just going to react to three of the questions that were posed from Benjamin, Nessar, and Constance, respectively. Benjamin, it's great to hear from you, and we're delighted to be working with SDG Youth on the platform. Just to sort of assure you that we're walking the talk at SE for All on this. We've invited youth participants to the Charrettes, our major event last year. And for everyone's information, we are co-hosting a virtual youth summit in February next year. This is a week-long summit really centered around young people with one main agenda item per day. We've talked about some of those today: integrated energy planning, clean cooking, finance, etc. So this is a youth-led initiative, which we're really happy to support. And Benjamin, I'd say the same thing that I did earlier around civil society, and that is we can't do this, we can't do SDG 7 without listening to end users. And we've heard the demographics in Africa just point in one direction. So as the end users now and in the future, it's critically important that youth have a seat at every table. So to the extent that young people don't already, I mean, it's incumbent on us older people to ensure that they do have a seat at every table. That's important. And Benjamin, you and your colleagues to advocate for those seats at the table if you don't have them. So I'm very happy to support youth engagement in a meaningful sense through SE for All. Secondly, Nasser, to your point on climate, some really interesting comments there. I guess I would come back to the economic argument on fossil fuels, and I think an increasing number of financiers are seeing this, that it's a loser investment, as I put it, in fossil fuels. So increasingly in many markets around the world, it is just cheaper to deliver energy to unserved people with renewables at lower first cost. So that's just a fact now, and that cost curve is continuing to go in the same direction. And the problems with fossil fuel are all going in the same direction as well, carbon pricing and so on notwithstanding. So, I mean, that's the economic argument. Just to quote, we've done some work on what we call recovering better at SE for All. For each sort of $1 million invested in Africa in large-scale solar generation, 80 jobs were created. So that just sort of tells the story in its sense that we really got to pivot away from this fossil fuel story to the extent it's still happening. That brings me to Constance's comments. First of all, a huge call out to the EIB in being a real leader in development finance on moving away and very clearly stating its position on sort of moving away from fossil fuel finance in quite an aggressive timeframe. So kudos to you. And Constance, I agree, we need to do a better story of telling success stories in energy transitions and good financial products that are working. I know some of our private sector colleagues, Kawasaki Ventures in particular, is on this call. There's a lot of innovation and really good work going on in financing for energy, and we need to be telling those stories better. I'm always happy to collaborate about that at SE4. Thanks very much, Amanda. I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Olivia. Francesca, I'd like to bring you in now.
Yes, thanks. So I'll just react to some of the things that were mentioned. And first, about the comment on Nasser, that Nasser was raising it. I mean, one of the values that the new European-African partnership should bring to solving some of the issues is to try to share possible avenues for solving many problems all together. And I think here I would like to bring back something that some of my fellow speakers was mentioning, which is energy planning. Energy is a complex issue. It's not just about availability of energy. It's also about reliability, affordability, like Frederick was mentioning, to all people, because it's a trigger to development. And of course, we want for this energy to be sustainable. So, and energy has many uses. So it is needed to move goods around the place. It's needed to light up the lights in schools, and it's needed to refrigerate food in order to enhance value that farmers get from their work. So there are good recipes, but there's no silver bullet in terms of energy, in terms of energy uses, energy solutions. And in this domain, I think that we should all recognize this complexity when crafting policies or advocating for policies. I mean, with reference to the ministerial meeting, the Africa Union Commission and EIA Commission meeting that Maximilian was referring to, there was the intervention of the energy minister of South Africa, Mr. Mantashe, and he was really, I mean, as you might know, South Africa has recently come up with an integrated resource plan, which is the projection of how they will plan for their energy needs in the next decades. And he was advocating for the fact that countries need to have the right to go for a balanced transition, which is not just, I mean, going from one end, all coal-based energy generation, to the other end, all renewable energy generation. Just because this is not achievable, and we run the risk if we do not allow for careful planning of the different energy needs to happen, and we do not sustain also this transition. So transitioning to less polluting and more cleaner and so more sustainable forms of energy, then we will miss the chance for real achievements and real progresses to happen. So I mean, I fully agree with the issue of making sure that the relationship between Europe and Africa is a relationship based on mutual benefit. It is, and the history of our company, Eni, is about this. But we have to also stress the fact that it has to be based on a political leadership and political partnership, because we see that the market alone is not leading us to the achievement of the SDG. So we need, with SDG 7, of course. So we need for these two sides, I mean, to cooperate. We need support for the regulators. We need sharing of good practices, and we need finance to flow. And therefore, I mean, the communication that was issued by the European Commission in March, I mean, setting the foundation for this new relationship, this new cooperation and partnership with Africa, I think it's very valuable in setting the tone for this new relationship, And especially, we are all waiting for the initiative on energy, where we believe, I mean, we hope to see many of the things that we're saying in this conversation today realized in terms of supporting for the various sources, political dialogue, technical assistance, and the importance of channeling public funding to the grids, which, as Kande mentioned, in Europe was developed thanks to public money, and it has to be put in the central spot of any initiative concerning sustainable energy in Africa.
Super. Thank you, Francesca. Finally, Daniel, I'd like to bring you back in.
Thank you very much, and I hope you hear me. I'm connected through my mobile now, so hopefully that works better.
We hear you
I think
fine.
the colleagues have highlighted many of the important points. Well, in response to the questions raised, I would just like to maybe mention three things. One is, I think on clean cooking, Kande alluded to it. It's really critical that this issue is being recognized as a central issue also by governments, and also governments need to be ready to allocate sort of scarce resources to that challenge. I can mention one quick example. We've been engaging with one African country recently, and it's actually a country, I would say, very much at the forefront of the recognition of the importance of access to clean cooking solutions. But when it came to then the country allocating a part of our African Development Fund resources that we have for the country to clean cooking, the situation looked different, and it was very clear sort of the indication that those resources would have to be grant resources, so we don't want to lend for clean cooking. So I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done with governments, really highlighting the critical role of clean cooking, also of course from the health dimension and the entire gender dimension that is critical. Just quickly on the aspect around climate change, I think we all know that obviously Africa is contributing minimally to global climate change, yet is sort of affected disproportionately. And I think in the conversation around the energy transition, there needs to be a very strong emphasis on the just transition, and that also includes, and I think it has to be highlighted, that the developed countries really live up to the commitments that have been made in Paris. I think we're not there by any means in terms of those commitments. So I think it's critical that support is provided to African countries to accelerate on the transition. I think the market context is there, as Olivia pointed out, but there is still a need for dedicated support. And finally, just I couldn't agree more with what Constance said. I think blending is key. It will also be critical that there's sort of a careful analysis around how those concessional resources are used most effectively. Sort of really respecting that minimal concessionality principle, so that those scarce resources really leverage a maximum in terms of other investments. And I think that will be key also if we want to scale up some of the successful programs and initiatives. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. We are coming to the end of our program for now. I was thinking about bringing Kande back in for any final remarks. I'm not sure if he's still there. Yeah, Kande. No, just a final word from you, perhaps. I mean, I know you're going to co-chair our new Africa-Europe strategy group later this afternoon on sustainable energy. Just maybe quickly, what key messages are you bringing to that meeting this afternoon?
The key message would be that we need a win-win partnership between Africans and Europeans. We have a joint interest in ensuring a just energy transition for Africa, but also for Europe. And in the final analysis, it must be about wealth creation, job creation, and accommodation of this large population of African youth that we see. It's going to be a wonderful market opportunity for Europe. We need to learn from Europe. One of our colleagues mentioned it about energy trade. I lived in Central Europe for many years, and Africa, the best way we can utilize all all our energy resources if we have that regional cooperation where we trade energy, building the right infrastructure. And finally, yes, I have to hammer that clean cooking matters. We mainstream clean cooking as part of energy access. As we drive electrification, we also drive clean cooking to empower our women. Most of the agriculture processing is done by firewood, and it's mainly done by women. So the clean cooking issue is also an economic issue. And our latest study from the World Bank, Clean Cooking Alliance, and the University of Loughborough is that this is a $2.4 trillion problem for the world when you look at the environmental dimension. So, Friends of Europe, keep doing this. This dialogue is necessary, and I was very pleased to see a number of youth participating and challenging the rest of us. But we need bigger collaboration now, particularly in a post-COVID world. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much to you. Thanks to everyone, really. Thanks to all of our speakers, all of our participants. It's been a really dynamic conversation, I have to say. I'm not going to wrap up because this isn't the end. We have more days of activities coming up ahead. Tomorrow is our Agriculture Day. Friday is our Transport and Connectivity Day. So please do keep an eye on our website at our Africa Europe Days page to see what we have coming up this week and where you can get involved. Thanks very much, and we will see you all again very soon.